Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into one of the most, truly devastating economic events in modern history, the Great Depression.
So, you gotta ask, how did the Roaring Twenties, this decade of jazz and prosperity, end not with a whimper, but with a massive global economic bang? Yeah, let's dive in and unpack the crash that literally reshaped our modern world. Okay, so to really get a grip on the collapse, we first need to look at the world that was trying to pick itself up from the ashes of World War I. The foundations, well, they were a lot more fragile than pretty much anyone realized at the time.
You see, before the war, Europe was this patchwork of huge empires, right? Kings, emperors, the whole deal. But after, they were just gone. And in their place, you had these brand new, often pretty weak democracies. A lot of them were run by what they call coalition governments, basically a bunch of different parties all trying to work together. It sounds good, but in reality, it made them super shaky and just not equipped to handle a big crisis.
And let's look at Germany's new Weimar Republic. Its own people blamed it for losing the war, so it's already on thin ice, and a massive financial crisis was brewing. Why? Because to pay off these insane war debts, the government did the one thing you're not supposed to do. It just printed more and more money. And that led to something called hyperinflation.
Things got so bad that money became almost worthless. Now, this chaos, it got a temporary patch-up job, thanks to a $200 million loan from American banks. And yeah, it stabilized Germany for a little while. But here's the crucial part. It basically tied the fate of Europe directly to the health of the US economy. Suddenly, there's this very fragile thread connecting Wall Street all the way over to Berlin.
All right, let's shift over to America in the late 1920s. On the surface, the U.S. economy looked like an absolute powerhouse, right? Just this unstoppable engine driving global prosperity. But, and this is a big but, there were some really serious flaws hiding just beneath the surface.
I mean, the scale of American dominance was just staggering. Get this. By 1929, factories in the U.S. were pumping out nearly half of the entire world's industrial goods. But all of this incredible productivity, it was creating a really critical imbalance. And here's the core of the problem. All that new wealth, it just wasn't being shared. You had factory owners making enormous profits, but the wages for their workers? Totally flat. And pretty soon you had a situation where the very people building all these new cars and radios couldn't actually afford to buy them. See the issue? So this kicked off a really dangerous cycle. You've got too many goods and not enough people who can afford to buy them. So what do the factories do? They cut production and lay off workers, which of course means even fewer people have money to buy anything. And the whole thing just spirals downward, weakening the entire economy from the inside out. Now, as the real economy, the one with factories and farms, started to wobble, a lot of Americans poured their money into what seemed like a sure thing, the stock market. It was booming. But here's the catch. That boom was fueled mostly by pure optimism and a ton of borrowed money. It was a massive bubble, and it was just waiting to pop. So after hitting a peak in September of 1929, stock prices started to slide. And then panic set in. On October 29th, a day that will forever be known as Black Tuesday, the market didn't just slide, it completely collapsed. And this, right here, was the first and most important domino to fall. Look, this was not just a market correction. No way. This was the beginning of the Great Depression. A decade-long global economic catastrophe that would completely redefine the role of government and change millions upon millions of lives forever. And the human cost was immediate and absolutely devastating, as thousands of banks just failed. 9 million people watched their life savings completely vanish into thin air. By 1933, 1 out of every 4 American workers was unemployed. Just think about that. But this crisis, it didn't stay in America. Remember that fragile thread we talked about? The one connecting Wall Street to the rest of the world? Well, it was about to snap and pull everything down with it. The crisis started to spread like a virus all across the globe. So, in a desperate attempt to protect its own industries, the United States basically turned inward. Congress passed these really high tariffs, which are just taxes on imported goods. The goal? Make Americans buy American-made stuff. But all this did was spark a disastrous trade war, because of course, other countries immediately hit back with their own high tariffs. And the result was, well, it was catastrophic. World trade, the absolute lifeblood of the global economy, plummeted by a staggering 65%. This just crippled countries everywhere, in Europe, Asia, Latin America, anywhere that depended on selling their goods to other countries to survive.
Okay, so now the world economy is in absolute ruins. Every nation is scrambling to find a way out of this mess. But as you can imagine, their approaches and the results were very, very different. And this, right here, really set the stage for the massive political conflicts that were just around the corner.
Over in Europe, in the more established democracies, the response was a bit more moderate. Britain, for example, put together one of those coalition governments to try and guide a slow, steady recovery. France, because its economy was more focused on agriculture, was able to weather the storm a little better. The key thing is, both of them managed to hold on to their democratic systems.
But back in the United States, things were different. The newly elected president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, launched this massive program of government reform called the New Deal. We're talking huge public works projects to create jobs, financial help for businesses and farms, and a whole new set of rules for banks and the stock market to try and prevent this from ever happening again.
Now, while economists still debate how effective the New Deal was, its political impact was enormous. It was absolutely crucial in restoring the American people's faith in democracy itself. And that's especially important when you see other countries starting to turn towards much more extreme, radical solutions to their problems. And all of this really leaves us with a critical question for today, doesn't it? This crisis forced governments to step into the economy in ways nobody had ever seen before, creating the kinds of programs and social safety nets that many of us now take for granted. It's such a powerful reminder of just how interconnected we all are. And it really makes you wonder, when the next global crisis hits, what lessons have we actually learned, and what will it take to rebuild?